welcome to our second episode of Quick and Dirty Yoga Philosophy. I'm Molly Lanning-Kenny, and today we're going to be talking about the Kleshas. Now, the Kleshas are something that is described by Patanjali in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutra is the classical text of Raja Yoga, so it's a classical text of the specific kind of yoga of practice. The time frame for the Yoga Sutras is around 3,000 to 5,000 years ago, something like that. We don't have an exact date on it. And Patanjali himself was said to be a sage, possibly an attorney, and a scholar. Sometimes there's even debate whether it was just one single person, or whether what is considered Patanjali might have been, or what was codified by Patanjali might have actually been the work of a group of scholars. What is definitely commonly accepted is that Patanjali did not actually write this text, the Yoga Sutras, in that he didn't write the intellectual or spiritual material, but he codified information that was largely accepted in the spiritual world, in the yoga world of this area of India. Here's one copy, one example of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. You can get these in multiple different commentaries, multiple different translations. I like this one by Swami Satchidananda. It was the one that I started with, and it's the one that I recommend to newer students, because Swami Satchidananda's way of delivering information is very conversational, very easy to understand. Comes from they're usually transcribed from like speeches that he gave or oral discourses. So it has a little bit more of that informal feeling to it, which makes it highly accessible. So that's Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. And what we're going to be looking at today is from Sutra 2.3. So the sutras are divided into 4 different sections or padas, and the second one is the portion on practice, and so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So it's the second chapter, the portion on practice. This is the third sutra. Sutra means something like thread, so they're these little aphorisms. They're these like short, pithy little statements that can have a lot of unpacking and a lot of different things that you can kind of glean out of the sutras as you begin to study and as you deepen in your study. The Kleshas are said to be the 5 obstacles to happiness. So according to Patanjali, we actually really only have these 5 different obstacles to happiness, or 5 different obstacles to freedom from suffering. So I'm going to go back to that in just a moment. First, I just want to show you the sutra here. Sutra 2.3, and it's Avidya, Smita, Raga, Dvesha, Vinivesha, Kleshaha. So say that 3 times fast. On another episode, maybe I'll do quick and dirty Sanskrit pronunciation. So that's looking at standard transliteration. When we look at this one here, we can see that all of these lines over top, that signifies that that's a long vowel. So for example, I know that this is raga, ra with the a being long and being short, or asmita. I know that those are both long vowels there. When we have a dot underneath or a slash over the top, that is the sh sound. Those are actually different in Sanskrit, whether it's the dot below or the slash above, but for our purposes, they both essentially have the sound sh. And then finally here, we have a dot underneath the H. In that case, we are going to double up on this vowel. So we're going to repeat that vowel that came before the H. So, avidya, smita, raga, dvesha, bhinivesha, kleshaha. So that's that. That's how you pronounce that. Sutra 2.3, you'll be able to find those diacritics, those code marks to help you to figure out some of the pronunciation if that's interesting. So first of all, I talked about the idea of happiness. So these obstacles to happiness are the obstacles to freedom from suffering. We have to make sure that we're all understanding that idea of happiness in the same way. So happiness isn't like, yay, I'm so happy, I just, got a new puppy, or I'm so happy, I don't know, I'm going to my favorite restaurant tonight or something like that. It's not that kind of happiness. So we use the word happiness, but what we really are talking about is that essentially like the state of yoga, the state wherein we have the experience of contentment or the experience of fullness, neither grasping for anything or pushing anything away, because we really are, as the very second or the Third Sutra says, we are resting in our own true nature. So maybe in a later episode 2 will be just an introduction to the sutras and how to use them and understand them. We're just going to move a little bit forward right now. So in the beginning, the sutras talk about that we're going to still the modifications of the mind, and in that way we're going to rest in our own true nature. And then we could say that largely the rest of this book, the Yoga Sutras, are giving us ways to understand how to get to that place, how to actually do that. So the obstacles to happiness are really like the obstacles to freedom from suffering, to living the life we perhaps want to live at that very deep level. So the great thing is that there's just 5 of these, which makes things easy. And it's said that the very first one actually begets all the others. So in fact, if we didn't have this first obstacle to happiness, then we wouldn't even have to look at any of the others. So it's pretty important. So let's look at what that one is. The very first one in that sutra is avidya. So avidya means something like lack of knowledge or ignorance. This here is negating the following word. So this word, vidya, means something like, we could say knowledge. So avidya, lack of knowledge, or we also might call it ignorance, right? So it's not ignorance like, you're not smart, or, you don't know a lot of information or something like that. It's ignorance in the yogic view, or the Vedantic view. It's the ignorance that we exist on this level of soul itself, and that soul or that consciousness or that loving awareness is not separate from the larger whole. We might say not separate from God, not separate from Brahman, which would be the word that's used in Sanskrit to depict what some people might think of as God, but Brahman is specifically non-personified. It's even said that Brahman is indescribable, unknowable, unnameable, but it's this essential experience of infinite awareness or unchanging awareness. When we realize that we exist at that deep, deep, deep soul level, and that this outer experience, our body experience, is separate, and we really connect with that soul level, then it's believed that we wouldn't have any other suffering, right? So if we really knew and really believed that this mortal coil was something that we were going to throw away when we died, like changing a pair of clothes, someone says, or might say, or stepping from one car into another car, from one vehicle into another vehicle, but there's that essential thing that remains. When we have cognition of that, or understanding of that, or faith in that, then a lot of the things that we are experiencing, and perhaps as suffering, on the physical material plane are not destabilizing us. So avidya is that lack of knowledge of our own connectedness, our own unity, our own it's that we cannot be separate from the divine, that we are part and parcel of that. An easy way that I use to think about that idea of the true self, or the true nature, is to think about the car. And if you have my book, this is in my book. If you've studied with me in person, or if you come on yoga teacher training, you'll surely see this drawing again. I call it one of my 7 yoga drawings, although now I'm up to like 10. So we can look at it this way, that each of us has a vehicle, and this is the vehicle, this is the body that I came in. So I came in as a female-bodied. I was born in 1966. I was born to a particular family. I am white-skinned and enjoy all the privileges of that, and have more responsibility related to that. All of those things are my vehicle. So that's the vehicle that I come in. And that vehicle experiences suffering, and it experiences joy, and like I said, it experiences access. People's vehicles also experience lack of access. But all of this is the material world. We want to make sure not to have what we might call spiritual bypass and think about like, well, that's just on the material world. Don't worry about it, right? Because the material world is also real. Recently, there's been a lot of deaths in 2016 of famous people and icons for a lot of people of us growing up. And I've seen some things posted on Facebook like, hey, this is all, it's natural, people die or whatever. And I saw someone respond recently, grief is also natural, right? So I'm saying that because part of our sense of spiritual bypass might be to say like, oh, don't worry about it, this vehicle doesn't even matter. But it does matter, right? Because it's the vehicle that we come in. In the same way when we think of like in social justice circles and then trying to overlay that with some of this Eastern spirituality, I also see people giving what I would say spiritual bypass, saying, hey, it doesn't matter, we're all the same, everybody is the same at this one essential level, we're the same. Well, sure, we're the same at this essential level. But again, this vehicle that I come in is really going to inform my experience and again, my access. And so we have to be attuned to that yes, we exist in this vehicle, and yet, according to yoga philosophy, at the same time, we exist on this kind of soul level, and that soul level is unchanging awareness. One way we can think about it. Awareness or soul. So that avidya, it says when we forget that we actually exist on this soul level, that's the root cause of all of our suffering, because that is the part that keeps us separate from our connection with the divine or our own self-realization that we also exist on that soul level. So then we begin to increasingly identify ourselves in this vehicle, in this material level, and that is a major cause of suffering. And in fact, it's the next of the kleshas. So the next of the kleshas is asmita. And asmita is usually defined as something like ego identification. Or sometimes people will say, or I'll say, I am-ness. So if I am living in this place of ignorance, where I don't understand myself as also existing on this soul level, or I might say fundamentally existing on this soul level, then I become very identified with that material world and that material body. And then I start thinking like, oh, these things, great things happen because I did those great things, or like, if only I would have worked harder, then this other thing would have happened for me. Or I'm only good enough because I was able to reach some goal, like I was the most famous yoga teacher, I had the most likes on Instagram, right? Like those kinds of things become the source of our happiness or unhappiness. Suddenly we're looking at like for our Facebook feeds, we see all these people liking us and we're like, oh God, great, good, I'm worthy, whatever. And then we might post another post, we're like, nobody liked this, and oh God, like what does that say about me, right? So that's all this ego identification, that's all this identification with this outer body, and we know that that causes suffering. And this was described by Patanjali, again, somewhere 3,000 plus years ago, that is a cause of suffering. But we can see how that connects up with avidya, right? So because if I had this knowledge of myself on this deep level, I would not be so involved in ego identification. The third and fourth ones are usually said to be two sides of the same coin. So there's raga and there's devesha. Raga is desire and devesha is aversion or hatred. So we can recognize how when I want something, I'm constantly wanting more. I want more yoga students. I want more money. I want this sweater instead of this sweater. I want this yoga mat. I want that cashew milk. Like whatever the thing is, it's that wanting that also creates in us those mental fluctuations that keep us from that realization of ourselves on that soul level. So that desire begins to consume us and keeps us from really living this life of equipoise, steadiness, an ability to be simple, to live simply, to think about other people and what their needs might be. In the same way, devesha is this like, I don't like any of these things, I'm just gonna push them away. I don't like that person, I don't like that television show, I don't like those cars, for me, I don't like those plastic water bottles, we don't like war, all of those things. Of course, we don't like those things, right? Well, the war part. But when I live in this place where I'm constantly trying to push things away instead of figuring out how can I be here, and from that place of equipoise, then I act, then I'm always acting from this place of mental instability again, right? And so much of the sutras are about calming the waves of the mind so that I can go back to that place of true nature. So even though I'm acting myself out on this material plane, it's coming from an awareness or connection to that soul plane. And that allows me to move through the world with much more clarity and ease. And even when I do have to stand up for something, stand up against injustice in the world, for example, I can connect with that part of myself that's quiet, clear, and steady, so that at the end I actually might be most effective. So raga and devesha, desire and aversion, these are also said to be obstacles to happiness. And we can think about going back to that first one. So again, that was avidya. If I knew myself deeply and I really bought and understood and believed and had faith in myself as an eternal, unchanging being, as my teacher Ram Dass might say, as loving awareness itself, if I truly, really felt myself as that, I probably wouldn't be that concerned whether I was drinking cashew milk or almond milk, or I wouldn't be so quick to be like, I hate this person, I hate that person. Or I also might be able to really be in this place of recognizing that things just happen in the world. Terrible things, wonderful things, all kinds of things happen in the world. And if I can find myself in a place, again, that's moving from that place of equipoise, I can respond to the world and the world's needs from a place of steadiness. So raga and devesha, desire and aversion. While avidya, the first one, is said to beget the others, this last one, abhinavesha, is said to be the one that is the most difficult to work with for even the most learned. So the fifth one, abhinavesha. Abhinavesha is clinging to life, or fearing death. And we can also talk about just loss in here. So if we think about like the small practices that might build us up to some acceptance of the fact that we are going to die and everybody we love is going to die, we might start to get better at just accepting all the little losses that we have, losses of relationships, losses of ideals of our own body, even like, I don't know, I lost a rash guard yesterday, losing my rash guard. And I know that sounds really silly and trite, but it's this idea that we can get better and better at just like letting go, because loving awareness doesn't need a rash guard. Unchanging awareness doesn't need my body to look any particular way. And ultimately, if we believed in ourselves and really had deep faith in ourselves that we do exist as loving awareness, and we really are like just putting on a new pair of clothes, or we really are just stepping into a new vehicle, then we might be able to approach the idea of death and loss with infinitely greater ease. I think it's worth repeating that even in the sutras, it's talked about this one being so difficult. And so I've used the word or the phrase spiritual bypass a couple of times, and I just want to say that again here, that when we say to someone like, oh, don't worry about that, you know, I said earlier with desire, like, oh, you know, things just die, or that's just the natural way. We're ignoring the fact that we do live in a mental and physical body on a material plane, so we can be tender in attending to those as well. But we can also look at that if we really truly believed we exist as consciousness itself, as loving awareness itself, then I would have infinitely less, if not no fear of letting go of this physical body. I'll end by just telling you about a story about the great Indian sage Ramana Maharshi. When he was dying, his devotees, of course, were absolutely bereft, and they wanted him to cure himself and to heal himself. And they, you know, eventually the story says they were just saying to him, "Oh, Guruji, Swamiji, please, please don't leave us." And what he said back to them is, "Where would I go?" So in other words, the fact that they knew him in the material body was just a thing, but that they didn't need his material body because his essence was unchanging. It couldn't possibly go anywhere. So those are the Kleshas, Sutra 2.3. They're considered to be the obstacles to suffering, or, the obstacles to happiness or freedom from suffering. There's 5 of them. Avidya, that's the ignorance, the lack of knowledge about existing as consciousness itself. There's asmita, that's ego identification, so I'm overly identifying with the material world. There's raga and devesha, desire and aversion, so that's using so much of our mental machinations to try to draw things towards us or push them away. And then there's finally fear of death, clinging to life. And one of the ways that we can work with that specifically is just noticing what happens in our mind when we have to let go of anything. Hopefully that's helpful. Quick and dirty yoga philosophy. You can learn more about this in my book, and of course on any Samaria yoga teacher training. Hope you have a beautiful day. Muchísimas gracias por venir. Adiós.